riding on the mule train with us today is no stranger to Muleshoe. He is Bill Durham, a Muleshoe High School graduate, and also Bill is now an author. Is this your very first book that you have written, Bill, that's come out?
Yes, it is. This is the first book I've written. It's a crime novel called Amarillo.
And now, when did it actually hit the bookshelves?
Last year. So summer of 2010 is when it first came out.
So how long did it take you to write Amarilla?
I think it took me about 3 or 4 years to write it, but sometimes there were periods of time in there when I wasn't writing on it, when I was acting in a play instead, and usually I have time for about one creative thing at a time, either acting or writing, but probably the entire process took me about 4 years.
So when did you first think about writing an actual mystery? Maybe not Amarilla or titling it in your mind, but when was that the first creative thought came?
I was in an acting class in Austin, Texas, and I had to invent a scene between two people in a car. So I sat down at my word processor, and the first thing that came out of my mind, the first idea, was a man and woman in the car, and the woman is afraid that her husband has something to do with the disappearance of her best friend's husband. And that's where the germ for the whole idea came from. And that's essentially what goes on in this book.
And that was what year in Austin?
That was, I would say, probably about 2001.
So it took a while there to finally get a pen to the paper or fingers to the computer.
It did. It took a while. The idea just kind of germinated for a while, and I wrote a screenplay version of it first. And then, yes. So
and what's the name of that?
It's also called Amarillo. And then after a while, I decided would it be a good idea to write a novel version of it, so I did that.
And so are you thinking about another mystery or another book?
I have two in mind right now, one that I'm working on actively, and it is a sequel to Amarillo with some of the same characters, another murder mystery. And then I have another mystery that I've written a little bit of, and it takes place in Los Angeles.
Now, you live in L.A., don't you?
Yes, I do.
Where specifically do you live now?
I live in North Hollywood, which is part of the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles.
And, of course, I think people say Hollywood and they think, oh, spectacular, marvelous, glitzy.
Hollywood itself is kind of a nasty place, really. It's
a little bit dirty.
It is. For the really fancy stuff, you want to go to Beverly Hills or Bel Air, which is where people live. When you go to Hollywood, you do get to see the Kodak Theater and all the stars on the sidewalk, a lot of that kind of stuff, the wax museum stuff. But really, Hollywood itself is kind of dingy.
And though in the glitzy days, it wasn't.
That's correct. Back in the 1940s, 1950s, it was much nicer than that. Schwab's drugstore, etc.
Now let's get back to what's at hand, Amarilla. It's the town Amarillo.
Yes, Amarillo, Texas is the setting for this novel. The main character in it is an attorney who is moving from New York City to Phoenix, but his car breaks down in the middle of Amarillo in the middle of a horrible sandstorm. A
sandstorm in Amarillo?
Yes, believe it or not. And people who from the Panhandle who have read this book say, I knew from the first page that this was really authentic. So this attorney ends up living in Amarillo and becoming a criminal defense attorney. And he gets a really nasty murder case, and it's up to him to figure out why his client committed a murder.
And so the names of the characters in there, do they have names like Liza Doolittle? Well, especially her daddy, who did very little. Are they just names? How did you find the character's name in your mind?
Well, they're certainly not Charles Dickens kind of names. One of the characters, I came up with his name because I wanted him to sound very Southern. And I thought, what are the two most Southern things I can think of? Smith and Wesson and Mason Dixon. So his character is named Smith Dixon.
Very good.
And then one of the characters, we don't even know her real name, even though she's very important, but she goes by the name of Angel, and she runs a pool hall in Amarillo. And another of the names came because, well, the last name, because two guys I went to college with, one from Hereford and then one from Lubbock, had this same name. So I just thought about names of people I'd known throughout my life and started putting them down on paper.
You don't have a Magan.
I don't have a Magan. I need to next time.
So the book cover is neat. Is that XIT in Muleshoe?
Yes, this is the XIT drive-in. I took this photograph myself in October of 1990. And when you go by the XIT drive-in today, I can't even see where it was anymore because there's just nothing left. But at the point I took this photograph, it had just closed. And on the sign, on the marquee, it says closed for season, but the letters are a little bit messed up, so you knew it was closed for good. But back then, the projector was still in the booth. A lot of the signs and the snack shop were there, but the glass was all broken. And two of the really important scenes in the book take place in an abandoned drive-in theater. So that's why I use that for the cover. Well,
and it certainly was abandoned when you took this picture.
Yes.
It became more abandoned.
Yes, and eventually just disappeared.
I think we all remember where it was, though, when we passed there.
Yes, some of us could probably get there in the middle of the night with our eyes closed.
You know, I have to tell you that you remember Polly Birdsong?
Yes.
Well, I loved Annie, and we saw Annie in Los Angeles, but I can't. It had just come out. It was in its first run in L.A., and friend Tanya was with us, and Gil Robert was a baby. Yes, I remembered now. He was born in 1975, and so anyway, I wanted Polly to see it so bad, but she just wasn't up to going to the theater to see a live theater production, because you'd have to go to Amarillo or Lubbock, when it came in the touring company, and it would be several years. And then it finally came out in the movie, and then we took her to the XIT to see it, which was Cox Drive-In in my day. What was it in your day?
It was the XIT drive-in when I moved here, yes.
So it lost its everything in the drive-in.
It did.
And the movie, too.
Yes, it wasn't as good, I think.
No. And she kept saying, "And you like this?" Anyway, back to Amarillo. I keep getting off subject. So, Bill, tell us a little bit about your background. You didn't live here all your life growing up. Where were you actually reared?
I was born in Texarkana, and when I was 6 years old, my father transferred. He was working as a civilian employee of the U.S. Army. So we went to Iowa, and I went first grade through the ninth grade in Iowa, and then I had family here, and my dad had just retired, and we didn't quite know where we were going to go, so we just decided to show up in Muleshoe. And so I started my sophomore year here and graduated from high school. I went to Texas Tech and got degrees in theater arts and English. Then I moved to New York City and got a master's degree in creative writing from NYU. And then I moved to Austin for about 10 years, and then to Los Angeles. And all of that time, I've been acting. I currently am a member of a company called the Will Geer Theatricum Botanicum. And that company was started by Will Geer, who was Grandpa Walton on the Waltons TV series. And now his family runs that. So I'm appearing there in a production of the French play Tartuffe right now.
Oh, what part do you play?
I play a really nasty character who comes in at the end to tell this whole family that they're being evicted from their home. So I'm just really nasty and officious. Mean.
Was that hard?
It's not hard. It's the most fun. The villainous roles are always the most fun to play. Yeah.
Now, last summer, what did you act last summer?
Yes, I was in two plays last summer, one called The Master Class, which is about an opera singer named Maria Callas, and I played a really small role in that. And then there was a play called Carry It On, which is a musical American history play, and I played Mark Twain in that and quite a few other different roles.
When you started writing Amarilla, how do you start?
I imagined this character in my mind, a guy named Max Friedman, and he is this Jewish lawyer, yes, from New York City. And I imagined him coming into West Texas at what would be the worst possible time. And so I decided on a sandstorm.
Oh, well, all of us could think it'd be a sandstorm.
That's right. And I had the basic plot elements in my head. I knew who was going to get murdered, who was going to be the killer, and then I knew that Max was going to defend the guy, and that he had a love interest in this pool hall owner. Now, the love interest, the romance between them developed.
Angel, right?
Yes, Angel, And Angel
in a pool hall.
Yes, the pool hall is called Bailey's because the bouncer is a very big wolf-dog hybrid who throws people out when it's time, and she decides who goes. This big dog does.
Mm-hmm. Well, why isn't it Lubbock instead of Amarillo?
Amarillo has the sound of it has a more musical quality, and also there's so many westerns that have been set in Amarillo. There have been country western songs with Amarillo in the title, and it just kind of flows off the tongue in a way that Lubbock doesn't.
And you really thought about all of this in titling it?
Yes, oh, definitely so. And during the 1990s, I spent a lot of time in Amarillo, and especially at a pool hall called Harvey's. So Harvey's was the basis for the place called Bailey's in the book.
Well, now, what about the pool hall in Muleshoe on Main Street? Did you spend time there?
I did when I was in high school, when I was supposed to be going to get a haircut, because Coach Didway would always send us out to get haircuts, and my friends and I would go down and play air hockey in the pool hall, and then we'd go back to school.
Well, you're honest. So the title, did it come first? Did it come during the time you were writing it, or after it had been completed?
I think it just came first. I knew that the town had to be a very important character in the book. And there's a really good song by a Lubbock songwriter named Terry Allen, and it's called Amarillo Highway. And I was listening to that song as I started to write the book, and at first I thought about calling it Amarillo Highway, but then I just decided, no, Amarillo is the right title for it.
Yeah, I like that better than the highway. It's sort of, you're thinking of something different. With the highway added to it. Also, what about the picture of the drive-in here in Muleshoe being on the front of the cover? Did you always have that in mind to be the cover?
I did, yes, because I really liked those black and white pictures I took back in 1990, and because the drive-in actually is where the murder takes place in the book, and there are actually 3 scenes that are very important in the book. So, from the beginning, I wanted that.
Now, what age were you when you thought, I'd like to act?
Probably about 6 years old.
Really?
Yes. In fact, in first grade, I can remember when there was a little play that the music teacher cast, and she gave the leading role to some other kid, and I was very upset because I wanted to have it. And one of the reasons I liked acting was as a little kid, I was praised for my ability to read aloud. So the teachers always picked me to read roles in plays, and I really just got to where I loved it. So by the time I came to Muleshoe and met Carrie Moore, I knew that I wanted to be an actor. And that's what I told him on the first day of registration, and he just started casting me in plays right away.
Well, now, what about the book being a play someday or a movie someday? Is there thought of that?
Well, I definitely...
You've already written, right?
Yes, I've written the screenplay. I definitely would like it to be a film. I've sent a copy of it to the actor Ed Harris and his wife Amy Madigan. So they have a copy of it, and I'm hoping that they're reading it.
You haven't heard from him?
I haven't heard from him yet. And I do know quite a few people in the movie industry, so I'm sending out copies here and there. all it's going to take is one person to read it and say, yes, and I want to do this.
Yeah, right. Well, then we'll keep our fingers and our toes and our legs crossed, okay?
Thank you.
And if you're in Muleshoe and you're keeping your fingers, toes, and legs crossed, boy, you've got to make it.
That's right. You've got it all covered.
So, just by happenstance, you're in Muleshoe. What year was that your father had retired and you all came to see relatives here?
It was in 1973. My parents and I had decided that we were going to move to Prescott, Arizona, but we got there during the middle of the rodeo frontier days, and we decided that we just didn't like it there, and we didn't know where to go. We literally didn't. We were just in a car with a lot of stuff, and I kind of as a joke said, well, we could move to Muleshoe. And when we mentioned it to my cousin, Margaret Hamilton, who lives here, she got to work and helped get my dad a job. So this is where we moved, and that was
how lucky, because Carrie Moore was the teacher in the drama department then, and is now. And boy, you really, I think the Lord had a little finger and a hand, and was turning the wheels on that car, getting you to Muleshoe, don't you think?
I absolutely believe that. I had no idea when we decided to move here that this high school was one of the premier theater and speech high schools. So it gave me exactly what I needed. And Mr. Moore is a mentor without whom I would be in a much different place today in my life.
And what about, were there any other teachers, English teachers, or did they have creative writing even in high school?
We didn't have creative writing. Burl Block, who was there for 1 year, was my English teacher my sophomore year, and he was also very influential on me.
Well, now, when you went to Tech, straight out of Muleshoe High School, you graduated what year here?
I graduated here in 76, and I went to Tech that year and graduated in 1980. And I did creative writing there and plays all the way throughout. I was a theater and English major and won the Best Actor Award my sophomore year.
For what portrayal?
It was a play called The Ballad of the Sad Cafe, and I played the kind of really evil hunchback dwarf.
Another evil character.
Yeah, I played a lot of evil characters. One of the best productions I ever was in Los Angeles with Delta Burke. So I got to be on stage with Delta Burke in a play, and that was a wonderful experience.
And now what play was that?
That is a play written by a Texas playwright, and it's called Southern Baptist Sissies.
Really?
It's about 4 gay men who grow up in a Baptist church in Texas. And then I was this gay alcoholic who just kind of sat in the bar all day and was very, very funny.
Now, at Muleshoe High School, can you remember some of the productions you were in under Carrie Moore's direction and how they did?
I can remember all the productions I was in, but the best that we did when I was there was my junior year, 1975. We did A Gap in Generations, and that was the first year that Carrie had gone to state. So he'd been there for 14 years without going to state. So that was the first time he went to state. And then the next year...
And how did they do, or you do at state?
We did not place at state. Tim Jinks got an acting award. And then the next year I went into state in prose reading.
And how did you do?
I did not place either, but I was really happy with my performance. Well,
that's the important thing, you know. If you're happy with your performance of anything, whether it's writing or etc. And I'm happy with your performance in your book, Amarilla. I think it's something that anyone would enjoy who enjoys a mystery. Anyone would enjoy who enjoys any good writing, and also you are in our area right now, and you're going to have some book signings in the West Texas area. Tell us about that, Bill Durham.
I will be signing books on Wednesday, August 17th in Amarillo at the Hastings on Georgia from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And then on Friday, August 19th, I'll be at Barnes & Noble on Slide Road from 7 until 9 p.m. So I'll be signing books there and talking to people, and I look forward to having a great time.
Oh, that'll be really nice. Now, if they're not going to be in Lubbock or Amarillo, how can they get your book?
They can go to Amazon.com and get the paper copy of it. Or, and this is the way a lot of people are reading it now, is through the Kindle. So they can go to Amazon.com and they can download it onto their Kindle, their iPad or whatever, and read it that way and change the size of the font and everything else. A lot of people have read it that way.
And how much is it in the paperback form?
$15.
And on Kindle?
I believe it's $6.50.
So it's very affordable. And now, Bill, tell us about your parents. Who were your parents?
My parents were Wheeler and Jean Durham. My dad, Wheeler, grew up in Bowie County in northeast Texas and served in World War II. He was at Pearl Harbor. And then he and my mom were pen pals during World War II, and they wrote back and forth for 5 years before they met in the summer of '45. My mom was from Orange County, California, so she moved out to Texas. And then they lived in Texarkana area until they moved to Iowa. Then we moved to Muleshoe. And then 4 years after we moved here, they went back to Texarkana area. And then my dad passed away in 1996, my mom in 99.
Well, you know, I remember your mother so fondly. Gil Roberts, she was your first Sunday school teacher. Did you know that? When he was 2 years old at the Methodist Church here in Muleshoe.
Yeah, Mom was a character. She always liked to do Sunday school teaching. She never worked outside the home for a salary, but she was always keeping busy volunteering.
She was a sweet lady. Now, where did your father work here in Muleshoe?
He worked at John Deere, which back then was Witt, Watts, and Rempe, and was there on American Boulevard. So he worked there for about 3 years until he stopped, and then about a year after that is when they moved back to Texarkana.
And he was completely retired at that time, right? Or not?
My dad always wanted to work doing something, so when they moved to Texarkana, he got a job at his next-door neighbor's sheet metal production company. He didn't want to sit around.
He's an industrious person.
Yes, before we moved to Muleshoe, he had actually retired from 37 years of service with the United States Army.
Isn't that something? Now, so you have a background of being from a family that industrious and also a family dependable. But where did the storytelling come in?
My dad and his siblings from East Texas were just great old country storytellers, and it was an art for them. A lot of them were not very well educated. My dad did not finish high school, and he was more educated than his siblings, but they knew the natural art of telling a story. And then my grandfather on the other side was, my mother's father was a cowboy who grew up in Kansas and Nebraska and moved out to California in the 20s and became a stuntman in the movies. He taught Clark Gable how to ride a horse. And he loved to tell me about that as well. So he just had a really good sense of storytelling. So between all that, the storytelling is the acting and the writing that I've always cherished.
Oh, how neat. That is wonderful. Well, we are so glad you had time to come by and visit us on the... Have you ridden the mule train before, Bill?
Just once. Back in about 1991 or so, I was here for an interview.
Oh, well, you're getting to be an old hand at it, you know. It's not a rough ride today, is it?
It's very easy.
And there's no sand like there is in Amarillo sometimes, but we do get sand, as you well know. We highly recommend the mystery Amarillo. You'll like it. Even if you don't like a mystery, you'll like Amarilla, because Bill wrote it, and because Bill's from Muleshoe, that makes it even more special. And tell us about your family, your wife and your stepdaughter.
My wife is named Susan Mills, professionally, Susan Durham otherwise. She is a singer with the Los Angeles Master Chorale, so she's a classical soprano, and she sings with 4 or 5 other chorales in Los Angeles as well. And my stepdaughter is named Taylor, and she just started 9th grade. She's doing great, and she was at summer camp this year at the same theater where I do productions. And she played the character of Lady Anne in Richard III, and she just did a brilliant Shakespearean performance.
I know you're proud of her.
I am so proud of that girl.
Well, are you going to stay in California in the Los Angeles area, or what's your plan?
Our plan is, when Taylor graduates from high school, to move to Austin, which is where I lived for 10 years, and they both love it there.
Good. Now, besides your acting and your writing career, I think you're a teacher too.
Yes, I teach American history and English in high school.
And in the Los Angeles school system?
Yes, the Los Angeles, the LAUSD, we call it.
Well, again, we are so delighted that Bill Durham has been with us here on the Mule Train today, and we want to remind you about his book signing of his book, Amarillo, and tell us again the dates.
That is Wednesday, August 17th at Hastings on Georgia in Amarillo from 6 to 8 p.m. And then Friday, August 19th, Slide Road, Barnes & Noble from 7 to 9 p.m.
And, of course, the really important thing is that you got to write the Mule Train.
That's right, of course. I'm honored.